Welcome back to the Hardware Unboxed podcast for episode 46. In this week's episode, we're going to be talking about Ubisoft finally getting their act together and releasing games on Steam. We're going to be talking about the latest Intel microcode update for Raptor Lake CPUs. Intel seems to believe that they've gotten to the bottom, the root cause of the stability issues for their processors. So we'll be chatting a bit about that. 9800X3D rumors as well, so potentially more Zen 5 CPUs coming very shortly. And Steve's got a very interesting story as well in this week's podcast episode, so stay tuned for that one. Anyway, let's get into it. Steve, how are you going? Another podcast coming to you. Well, we're doing the podcast. It's coming to your ears, the listener. You here with me, Steve? How are you going?
That's how that works. Not the best, but I'll save it for the boring life segment. Let's just say I've been brutally attacked, but I'm okay.
You've been brutally attacked. Well, that's interesting.
Yeah, by really, really small things. But anyway, I survived the encounter. Have a few gross details to share. So,
perfect. Love a gross story.
Yeah, so there'll be a gross story for sure. I mean, we'll save that for the boring life segment. But outside of being brutally attacked, it's been pretty boring just testing some motherboards. Well, that's not boring. Let's be honest. Motherboard testing is just the ultimate fun.
Exciting.
Doing some USB 4 testing, all that sort of stuff. So that content should be ready for early next week. Other than that, nothing really terribly exciting to report. At least there's a few interesting things that have arrived this week that I'm under NDA, so I can't talk about. So there are some exciting things happening. It's not all just USB 4 testing. Yeah. What about yourself?
Oh, yeah, not too bad, not too bad. Just get cracking into some testing for content that you'll probably see in a couple of weeks from now. So I don't want to go in too many details on that.
I think I know what that is.
There'll be a few videos on this coming your way in October. But yeah, that's been my week really. So yeah, this week's podcast episode, again, a couple of interesting news topics to talk about. And the first one I want to start with is related to Ubisoft, a company that gamers just love. They are so enamored with Ubisoft. Their stock is at an all-time high. Gamers just love their games. And this week, there's been some interesting news relating to Ubisoft.
Are you being sarcastic?
No.
Okay,
No,
cool.
Ubisoft is a beloved gaming company with a great reputation. So now, I'm not huge, I don't really care too much about gaming news. So this isn't really a gaming podcast. So, the news this week, the main news that a lot of people will be covering are things like Assassin's Creed Shadows has been delayed to February 14, 2025. It was scheduled to come out in November of this year, I believe. It's been delayed. Not that interesting. The thing that interests me is that after years of Ubisoft being very dumb in their decision-making with what platforms to release games on, Assassin's Creed Shadows is coming to Steam the same day as Ubisoft Connect.
Good.
For the first time in, forever for a Ubisoft game. They used to do this a while back. They decided Ubisoft Connect's the place for all our games, which was obviously the case with Star Wars Outlaws that we saw released. Now, Star Wars Outlaws is also coming to Steam on November 21st. So they've also sort of gearing up to do this launching games on Steam thing. And they've come out and said, all of our games in the future will be launching on the same date on Steam. Now, I would have thought that they should have been doing this for bloody years. Why on earth has it taken them this long to release their games at the same time on Steam?
Yeah, it'd be even better, though, if you didn't need the Uconnect aspect of it at all.
Yeah, that's right. Because some of the games, right, you launch it on Steam and it loads the Ubisoft Uplay thing as well.
Yeah, that'll be the case for all modern games that have eventually ended up on Steam, whether it be like EA or Ubisoft. So that's still pretty annoying. It's less annoying because it's easier to update and all that, but still annoying.
Yeah, I think EA announced that Dragon Age: The Veilguard will be one of the first games that they don't make you do that with the EA launcher. That will just launch natively on Steam.
Nice, that's good.
So that's good. So yeah, we don't really know whether Assassin's Creed Shadows and Star Wars Outlaws will still require the Ubisoft launcher. But these games, they cost hundreds of millions of dollars to make. And PC gamers just don't buy stuff that's not on Steam. Steam is the platform. We talked about this a while back when we kind of crapped on the Epic Games launcher for a while, that you're kind of doing a disservice to your game if you're not releasing it at the same time on Steam. In fact, just recently, I saw a couple of sales for games that I own on the Epic Games Store, games like Borderlands 3, and I decided, you know what? It's worth paying the extra $6 or something to rebuy this on Steam, just in case I need to do it for testing because of how much better Steam is. So it feels like some of these games, companies kind of shoot themselves in the foot a little bit by saying, you've got to use Ubisoft Connect, you've got to use the Epic Games Store, you've got to use EA Play, which is probably the worst of them, or you've got to use the Microsoft Store. Thankfully, Microsoft changed course on that as well.
Yeah, that's bad.
It's not good decision-making, is it, to release games on platform, not have it available to all customers on all platforms?
Yeah, that's right. It's a very dumb idea. I know there'll be people that will reply with something like, we don't want Steam having a monopoly. Like, you don't want just one game store to rule them all, which I absolutely do agree with to a degree. You really do want one localized store that everyone's using that you go to that's good, right? That you only need one good store. So we want one good store. The new Steam families thing's awesome. That's really, really good. Multiple Steam is the best. Like, you can have multiple like, you can log into Steam with the same user account. I don't know how many times, at least a dozen, and it won't boot any of them out, and you just stay logged in indefinitely. So it's great for my kids in that I log them in. It's no hassle having to log back in. Like, I had to get Zoe a game on the Ubisoft Connect, and nightmare. Just constantly have to re-log in passwords and stuff. It sucks. Also, for testing, if I log in on one computer and I want to download a game off Ubisoft Connect, and then I want to play a different game on a different computer, they both can't be logged into the same account at the same time. It's ridiculous. Like, that's crazy. So I guess what I'm saying is, yeah, look, you don't want a monopoly, but at the same time, one good store is all you need. Now, you might say if it becomes Steam rules them all and it's Steam and Steam only, then Steam might start to become anti-consumer, as we tend to see these things go that way. But it's not like an operating system type situation where it's just so difficult to create a store. The reason why the other stores haven't done well is because they're the crap stores. The monopoly is Steam has become a monopoly by being good. So, I get the risk that they be good, they crush the competition, there's no alternative, then they be bad. That could very well happen. It would be short-sighted and stupid of them. That doesn't mean it wouldn't happen, but that would be dumb, because then people wouldn't be happy with Steam, and then alternatives would start to crop up and people would go to those alternatives. So it's not like Steam's become a monopoly by doing, well, some people might argue there's examples of stuff like this, but in my opinion, overall, they haven't been very anti-consumer. They haven't done a lot of dirty deals. And I know there's deals that go on and stuff, and they've got their own best interests, but I think Steam is pretty good. And certainly from a user perspective, it's the best.
There's not a lot of exclusivity deals that I can recall where a game developer has chosen deliberately not to put it on other platforms. Usually the thinking, if it's only on Steam, is because that's where the gamers are. Most people are on Steam. So, excluding it off the Epic Game Store or whatever is most likely a decision based on that, as opposed to there being dollar deals, which is what Epic Games did to get exclusives like Borderlands 3 onto the Epic Games Store. They paid to have it not on alternative platforms. And I think while alternative platforms offer better cuts for developers, like the Epic Games Store supposedly gives developers a better split for the revenue from each game, then there's probably still going to be enough competition where developers are not going to put all of their eggs into the one basket. But if there's all different platforms available, it doesn't make sense to not have them on all of the platforms. So then gamers can choose, oh yeah, most of my games are on Steam, so I'll use Steam. Maybe someone else is primarily a Fortnite gamer and would rather not have a Steam account, and so would buy all their games on Epic. Now, I don't believe there's that many of those sorts of gamers, but that could be a realistic scenario that someone would use. But forcing people to use platforms that they don't want to use is just not going to drive game sales. Like having it on Ubisoft Connect, that's not the play that leads to the most sales, the most people playing your game. Having it on all the platforms is.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, maybe in the future, Steam will get taken over, or Gabe Newell will pass away, unfortunately, and cede control of Valve, and Steam will go down the toilet or something. But I think a great point that you pointed out was that it's not difficult to make another store. It's not like it's going to take heaps and like you have to release hardware for it and you have to go all out convincing people to use it. If Steam did a whole bunch of anti-consumer stuff and then there was this other magical great store, people would just flock to using that. Like there's the barrier to entry to switching stores is so low. And this is, I guess, kind of what blows my mind about how places like the Epic Game Store couldn't gain more footing, is that the barrier to entry is so low, and yet they didn't, I guess, look at the features that people wanted from stores like Steam. Like, why do people use Steam? I guess part of it's because they've got most of their library there, but also just the general usability, the features, things like that keep people coming back. And the improvement over time, Steam is continually at the forefront of developing the technology so that it's always the best available option.
I think, like, especially a company like EA, they didn't create a game store that gamers want. They created a game store that they wanted for gamers, and that's why it didn't work. So it was like they were delusional. They tried to pretend that Steam wasn't competition or it didn't exist and that there wasn't a better alternative that people would just use. And instead, they made the game store they wanted to control gamers via, and it didn't work out because people would just go to the better alternative.
I think it's kind of an arrogant approach, isn't it? Like EA, Ubisoft, they're sort of saying, well, you know, our games are so good that you will want to play them wherever. Like if we force you to download EA Play or Ubisoft Connect so that we get our 100% cut of store revenue or whatever, then you're going to be so desperate to play Star Wars Outlaws, Assassin's Creed Shadows, Star Wars Jedi, whatever those games. You're going to be so keen to play them that you'll definitely download our store, and we don't even have to make it good because you'll be that desperate to play FIFA or whatever that you'll put up with it. So we can make the biggest pile of crap. And I think what they've found over time is that there's so many games on PC that people just don't play it day one, or they wait, or they just never buy it. Like, you don't have to play Star Wars Outlaws on the Ubisoft Connect. You could just not ever buy it because you're not that interested in the game, and Ubisoft Connect's a bit of a barrier, and you'll just play something else.
I'm pretty sure I got it on.
There's so many other options.
I didn't even buy it on. I bought it on Epic Games, I'm pretty certain, because that's a better store, which is why I bought it there. So, I think that was the only other store it was on. I mean, I could be wrong about that. Yeah, you can, but yeah, I've got it on. I've got it on the Epic Games Store because that's a better store than Ubisoft. So it just sort of proves the point, right? You buy them on I buy them on whatever store I can. That's the best store. But if it was on Steam, I would have bought it on Steam.
I think as well, Ubisoft not having games on the Steam store, they lose that advertising opportunity. Like, so many people use Steam, they open the Steam store, they see the games right there, they wish list them, pre-order them on that platform, that if it's all hidden away, then it's relying on external marketing to do a lot of the job that would be done on PC. You lose out people trying to play games on the Steam Deck as well, which is a very popular platform. Of course, you can install other operating systems on the Steam Deck, but it's difficult, so most people just stick to what's available on Steam. So there's so much marketing opportunity that's left out if gamers have to go to Ubisoft Connect or go to the Epic Games Store, or try and find their gaming news from other websites or find advertising on Twitter. Like, I don't think that would have saved a game like Star Wars Outlaws from getting the disappointing sales that it got, but it wouldn't have helped to have it only on Ubisoft Connect. And yeah, like those platforms, I know Ubisoft Connect recently got a big update that improves the user interface and those sorts of things, but it didn't fix like the core functionality, like things like being able to log in on more than one computer, something that you brought up, right?
And it's not even a situation where it logs you out and then you have to click log back in. It deletes your entire profile, as in the sense that you have to insert your username again, your password. I know this sounds trivial, but having to do this every single time just to play a game is so annoying, especially if you have like a proper password. So you've got to like put in, a 13-digit password or character password. Not great. So yeah, that sucks. And it's why It's why even a game like Star Wars Outlaws, as silly as this sounds, I would find the game more appealing, at least to purchase and then to use if it was on Steam, opposed to
Yep.
the Ubisoft store, just because of the ease of like loading the game, using the game, updating the game, being able to play it on, my office PC, then come over to my game PC and just play it there. It's a seamless transition on Steam. But and even with a lot of the Steam games as well, you can install them on a local server and play them off the server using high-speed networking anywhere. But I think pretty much all of the Ubisoft games don't allow you to do that. It has to be on a local C drive for it to actually work. So probably not something that's going to bother too many gamers, but it's annoying. You have to have multiple installs of the one game just because you play it in a few different locations, which again, probably not something that many gamers are doing. But it is the flexibility. It's a powerful feature that you do get on Steam.
Yeah, I think I've seen comments of people saying, relating to like issues like this and also the PlayStation login that we talked about with God of War Ragnarok last week. PC gamers are going to whinge about anything. I hear that a bit like, PC gamers, they're always wanting to crap on about some minor trivial issue. But I think what's forgotten in those conversations is the competition that there is on the PC platform that you don't get on other platforms. So minor inconveniences on the PC platform just mean a gamer is going to do something else on their PC. Like I said, there's tens of thousands of games that you can play on Steam. Most people have extensive Steam libraries. Games are relatively cheap on PC. So it's not like you're tossing up, do I buy Star Wars Outlaws for full price or do I need to buy the 5-year-old game for full price? It's like, well, if it's a little inconvenient to play Outlaws, then I'll just buy a $5 game from a few years ago on Steam and play that, or play one of my backlog of games, or go into the store and dive into the thousands upon thousands of games that are on that platform. Whereas if you're on a platform like the PS5, there's a lot less games available for that platform. So you're kind of constrained a bit more in your choices. And on PC, in addition to that, PCs are useful for all sorts of other things. So you may even choose not to game at all. You could just do something else on your PC at that time. And so any little barrier that game companies are putting up in the face of accessing games that people want to play is going to cause people to make these sorts of judgment calls of like, do I do this or do I do that? And like I said, I think Ubisoft and EA have been arrogant in thinking that their games are so good that you'll just put up with all that stuff, which I think over time has proven not to be the case, at least as the quality of some of those companies' games has dropped over the years. They certainly haven't been able to rely on that. I think maybe Rockstar Games with like a GTA 6 could pull a move like that. Cyberpunk 2077 sort of game probably could have pulled a move like that, but not Assassin's Creed Shadows, not Star Wars Outlaws, not Dragon Age the Veilguard from EA. They don't have the reputation to get away with that anymore. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I think Microsoft learnt this lesson a while ago with the Microsoft Store. They'd moved all their games across to Steam, and I'm sure that would have led to better sales. EA seems to have learnt that lesson. They've started to they were putting games like Star Wars Jedi on Steam to begin with. Now they're taking the additional step of removing EA Play from there, so it's just a native Steam game. I think these companies are learning that Steam is the place to be on PC. If you're not on Steam, you're irrelevant. So, Ubisoft's stock has just gone down the toilet. So it kind of makes sense that they would be fixing these sort of things. But it's kind of like a panic. You feel a little bit of the panic lever when they're pulling the, we really need people to buy our games, so we'll cut out all that anti-consumer garbage and we'll really try and make people interested in these games. But, I guess that's that. Next up, and this is an interesting story that I saw today, is Intel's update on the Core 13th and 14th Gen desktop instability issue. Mm-hmm. So this seems to be Intel's, by reading their latest statement, this seems to be the final update, or at least they seem to be implying that they have found the final root cause of the problem after many months. So they've published an update on their website, on their community pages. It's quite detailed, so I'll just read some of the highlights. So basically they're saying, following extensive investigation of Intel Core 13th and 14th Gen desktop processor vmin shift instability issue, which is what they are calling the instability issue in long form, they say Intel can now confirm the root cause diagnosis for the issue. So like I said, they're sort of saying they believe they've found the problem. So they say Intel has localized the vmin shift instability issue to a clock tree circuit within the IA core, which is particularly vulnerable to reliability aging under elevated voltage and temperature. Intel has observed these conditions can lead to a duty cycle shift of the clocks and observed system instability. That's complicated, so we'll probably break that down in a moment. But basically, Intel says they've identified 4 operating scenarios that can lead to vmin shift in affected processors. So one of them is motherboard power delivery settings exceeding Intel power guidance. The second one is ETVB microcode algorithm, which was allowing Intel core processors to operate at high performance states even at high temperatures. So ETVB is their thermal velocity boost technology. The third reason was microcode SVID algorithm requesting high voltages at frequencies and duration, which can cause vmin shift. And the fourth, and what appears to be the most recent one, is microcode and BIOS requesting elevated core voltages, which can cause vmin shift, especially during periods of idle or light inactivity. Yeah, so Intel is releasing the microcode 0x12b or 0x12b, whatever you want to call it, which encompasses all the updates that should fix this. And this will be available on various different platforms. You have to download a new BIOS update, and they're claiming that performance updates relative to the previous versions of microcode, this should be within run-to-run variation, and they provide a few details there. So Steve, that's the details. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, not too much to add to it based on what we've already said from the previous microcodes. So that is to say, these have to be rolled out. We have to update. Really, all we can do short-term is benchmark them and confirm that, yeah, look, run-to-run variance, there's not a huge change in performance, so you can expect the performance you've been seeing previously. I mean, I guess it depends on how your motherboard was configured because that'll have some impact, but PL1, 253 watts, PL2, 253 watts, you should be seeing the expected performance there. But beyond that, we don't really know if it does solve the stability issues, if it stops CPUs from degrading rapidly. It's probably going to be many, many months before we even start to get some idea of whether this problem has been solved. And then there's the whole angle of CPUs that have already degraded. Obviously, Intel's gone out of their way to avoid talking about CPU degradation, and they're more just saying, like, for those of you that are having stability issues, update to this and it will solve your problems, which is extremely unlikely to be the case. So CPUs that have degraded quite, well, beyond the point that this update would see stability return, those users are going to have to get their CPU replaced, which we've heard reports of, 1400K replacement CPUs drying up and stuff like that, and even 1300Ks. Beyond that, it's really a waiting game now, which is not a great situation to be in. I guess is Intel just hoping that the warranty periods on a lot of these CPUs will just expire before people like?
Oh, they can't get away with that.
Well, it's a messy situation. At the moment, we're just taking Intel at their word, aren't we? We're saying, okay, well, they've found the root cause. They've got some microcode updates that should solve that problem. But realistically, let's say they do or don't solve the problem. I suppose it doesn't really matter. It's we don't know is the point. If you buy a CPU today or have a relatively new CPU or just a CPU that isn't suffering instability issues and you update to this microcode, does that solve the problem? And again,
I guess it could delay it, couldn't it?
Well, is it going to be a problem in a year from now? The thing is, we don't know whether it's, unless you could time travel 3 or 4 years into the future and go, yep, guys, with all the CPUs that weren't showing issues, that were patched, 3-4 years down the track, still not showing issues, great success. Then there's a whole, what would you call it, a range of issues here. So there'll be some CPUs that have degraded so much that this microcode update won't see stability return, right? Like they cannot run within that specification anymore. But then there'll be some that have degraded a little bit and were crashing every now and then, that this patch will stop that crashing. Whether, again, the damage has sort of been done there and it will return in 12 months from now, So it's a messy situation, and you're never really going to get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, it seems like with this entire statement, they're trying to make it difficult to understand what, like, for an average consumer, this statement is is filled with a lot of technical jargon. It might be correct technical jargon, but there's a lot of technical stuff here. So, for example, when they say, they've basically identified the issue to a clock tree circuit within the IA core, which is part of the CPU. And they're saying this is particularly vulnerable to reliability aging under elevated voltage and temperature. So my translation for that would basically be reliability aging, kind of code for these CPUs aged, aka degraded, faster than we expected under elevated voltage and temperature conditions. So they're not saying like this is silicon degradation, but the vmin shift issue makes these CPUs more vulnerable to these issues cropping up. When they say things like vmin shift, I guess what they're trying to imply here is that the minimum voltage that is required for these CPUs to run has shifted due to these issues, which my understanding would be that you can't shift it back. Like if the CPU requires more and more voltage to run at stable frequencies, that's not something that you can just turn around and put back the other way over time. That is the condition of the CPU. The CPU is degraded to a point where...
It's essentially runaway degradation at that point.
Yeah, that's right. So they're quite like, I'm not expecting them to come out and say our CPUs have degraded irreversibly and require higher voltages, but using language like vmin shift kind of sounds cool. Oh, vmin shift was happening. That explains it. Nice.
It's a new feature.
Yeah, my CPU is unstable because of vmin shift, not irreversible CPU degradation. Sounds a bit nicer, right? But effectively, that is what they're saying. So everything that you've been saying about the CPUs potentially not being able to be made stable with these problems, all of the mitigations that they're talking about here sound like it's designed for people that have good CPUs to prevent them from getting vmin shift in the first place. None of these microcodes that they're talking about are saying this will make vmin shift go the other way, as in shift back down to where it should be. It's saying things like, it was requesting higher frequencies or higher voltages than it should have. This algorithm was doing this, and the BIOS wasn't quite doing what it should have done, so this was causing vmin shift. And the microcode is going to stop it from requesting those sorts of voltages during idle or light activity or various different operating conditions. It's not saying, this will make the CPU improve or get better. They're just trying to prevent it from happening. So yeah, we kind of have to take them on their word for this, don't we? And especially when they say things like they're claiming that this will not be an issue for Lunar Lake and Arrow Lake family processors. So future products, they're saying these are unaffected by the vmin shift instability issue. I guess we're just taking their word for on that, aren't we?
Yeah, we are, in the sense that if this is the problem, or if it is or isn't the problem, if it is genuinely the problem, then what they're saying is true, because they've identified the problem, they know how to solve the problem. They're not going to then turn around and release a brand new architecture, a new generation of products, and somehow have that problem that they'd already solved.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So that's just not going to happen. But again, the question is this the problem? Is the problem really addressed? So again, we don't know. Like, people are going to ask us to make a video on this and test it. It's like all we can do at this point in time is test the performance of these updates to see what resulting performance we get. And if it's within margin of error, run-to-run variance of what we're already getting, it's like, okay, that's good. We can establish that there's no degraded performance, let's say. There's no regression in performance. But that's really just a small piece of this puzzle. It's an important piece. We don't want performance going backwards when compared to what was advertised to people. But that's just one component of this. Like, we need to know, are the stability concerns, are the degradation concerns actually addressed? And again, we can't answer that. We need extensive testing that's carried out over 6-12 months, longer, over tens of thousands of CPUs. So it's really a community effort, which is what led us here in the first place.
And there's going to be a lot of confusion around it, because if the update doesn't solve stability issues for people that already are having stability issues, but then the update wasn't ever designed to fix those CPUs, then you're going to have reports of people saying, well, Intel claims they've fixed it. They're saying they've identified the root cause. I applied the update. My CPU is still not stable. So there's going to be that, and then there's going to be that combined with people who had a stable CPU, and if this update indeed doesn't work, then down the line, potentially they would have stability issues cropping up again, even on the latest microcodes. Mm-hmm. So that's going to be mixed in with the first set of people. And then there's going to be people where they have a working CPU, they've applied all the updates, and then they're having stability issues that are not related to this in any way, like could be from memory overclocking or some other issue, right?
Yeah,
so there's going to be people in 6 months from now with their 14900Ks applying or thinking that there's all those different factors, right? Like there's not going to be, at least in my opinion, any real clarity on this issue moving forwards because of all those different variables that are now in the market. As you say, people are having issues getting replacement 13900K, 14900K CPUs because it sounds like Intel doesn't necessarily have too many of them. So that's another nightmare sort of situation. So I guess it's good that Intel seems confident that they've said that this is now, they've now found what they believe is the root cause. All their previous updates, they've sort of been, we're still investigating this. We're not sure. We believe this is a component of the issue. We're still looking into this. Now they're sort of saying, we've found the problem. But again, like there's never going to be clarity on whether Intel has fully fixed this or not. We just have to hope for the best, really.
Yeah, you can get a rough idea. So a lot of the people that use, or companies that use these CPUs, the KSkew 13th, 14th gen CPUs for game servers, for example, if they still have, like a lot of them reported switching over to AMD. So if they still have those servers, they can put them in use. Maybe they'll do it under some sort of test scenario. They can update them, see if that addresses the stability issues they were seeing, and then how that goes long term. Because these are competent users, right? They're not your average Joe who's researching how to put their computer together and working out which memory fits in the DIMM slots. These are system admin guys that know the hardware and software side of things inside out. So it's pretty interesting to see or will be interesting to hear what they find with these updates, especially if they still have those affected systems. So if they apply the update and they're still seeing stability issues, was it because the CPUs were too degraded to begin with? Or is it because this doesn't actually solve the problem? But yeah, again, as we've been saying from the start, super messy, massive problem, really just a disaster for those generations.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly hope that this is the end of this saga and that this is the final problem that's been found, the final fix for it has been applied. I really hope that this won't be an issue because it's not great for people that have bought 13th and 14th gen parts to run into this. They've obviously been keeping up with the news and all that sort of thing across many months. So to have an actual solution would be fantastic for those owners and at least restore some confidence in Intel products moving forward. And like I said, you'd be pretty surprised if future generation products would have issues like this. But yeah, I mean, there's still a number of things for Intel to work through with that and make sure that they're getting Arrow Lake up to scratch so that people are interested in them once again. They can restore confidence from consumers so that they're not thinking about stability issues when potentially purchasing a next generation product. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I believe they're saying that the BIOS update should be available in the next couple of weeks from board partners, so it shouldn't be too long until people will be able to get their hands on it. And at least that's good news for you because those updates should be rolling out before the launch of Arrow Lake parts so that when you're coming to benchmark, comparisons for the next generation of processors, the updates are available beforehand. That's something that we were a little worried about was like, are they going to push this into the next generation, sort of try sweep it under the rug? It's getting pretty close to Arrow Lake, but they're trying to resolve it beforehand and not make it so that the updates, if there was any performance degradation, that was happening after people were testing next generation Intel CPUs. That should all be happening beforehand, so you should have some nice up-to-date data and information that you can use to compare, which at least is something, I guess. So the final news topic that I wanted to talk about a little bit in this episode are rumors of the AMD Ryzen 7 9800X3D. the rumors relating to this CPU seem to have been all over the place. With previously, a couple of months ago, they were suggesting a launch in September. As I'm looking at the calendar right now, it's getting pretty close to that, and I don't believe that we will be seeing the 9800 X3D in September. The latest rumors, then rumors were sort of suggesting, it's been delayed until next year. Now there's new rumors suggesting that it will be released at the end of October, or at least some point in October. This is coming from the Chip Hell forums, so you can take this with a complete grain of salt. We have no corroborating evidence or anything like that to suggest that the 9800 X3D is just about to launch, anything like that. So just want to be very clear that we're not suggesting for a second that this rumor is accurate or anything. However, they're suggesting that there was a recent internal Gigabyte event, and they were talking about parts like the 9800 X3D, with that CPU coming in October and the higher core count models coming next year.
I would not be shocked at all if a 9800 X3D type product finds its way onto the market around the time Arrow Lake arrives. That would make sense to me that was going to happen. I have no insight really as to whether or not that is going to happen, but that would be my expectation. Even prior to this rumor, I would have expected AMD to be in contact relatively early next month and give us a heads up on that incoming CPU. But 9800 X3D could be coming late next month. That would be pretty exciting potentially. Again, not really sure what to expect there. The 9700X, for example, is ever so slightly faster than a 7700X for gaming. That I think has been pretty well established at this point. So 900X3D should at the very least be a little bit faster than the 700X3D, which again, not terribly exciting, depends on pricing. 700X3D, I'm not even sure you can still buy that CPU at this point in time.
Yeah, it's been difficult to obtain, that's for sure.
Yeah, which again, when that started to be the case a few weeks ago now, that to me was a pretty clear indication that the 9800X3D launch wasn't too far away. The last thing AMD wants to do is flood the market with affordable 7800X3Ds and then try and release a 9800X3D up around $400 US probably.
So do you think that they've discontinued it and that's why they're so expensive, or they're just halting, like slowing down the release of those parts?
Either one. It's one of those. Pick. It doesn't really matter, does it? It just they're trying to make the 9800X3D a more appealing product. And what did the 7800X3D get down to? About $330 US, something like that.
Oh, I think so. There was, I've just looked on Newegg and it's like $600 or something through third-party sales, which is obviously
and what's
ridiculous. But I believe at their lowest they were maybe 300. Let's just have a
I definitely saw them for 330, and of course the MSRP is 450. Zen 5 MSRPs were lowered slightly, sort of. I mean, there was that whole 65 watt, 105 watt things. They took away the cooler, so was the MSRP really lowered?
A touch under $350 has been their lowest. So $330 was probably the absolute lowest that it's been.
Yep. So 9800X3D could be coming in at $450 US. Won't be lower than $400 US. So that alone would suggest to me, if I had to just play the guessing game, that the 9800X3D is indeed only a smidgen faster than the 7800X3D. Because if they're worried about a $50 to $100 US price discrepancy, that would suggest to me that you're not getting a lot here. It's going to be a couple of percent, Zen 5% at best for gaming performance uplift. But that's speculation on my end based on just the sort of all the available information. But
it's an interesting thought, because I think AMD should have gone with a different strategy for launching Zen 5. And, if what you're saying turns out to be correct, and that the stock issues that we're seeing for the 7800X3D are related to the launch of a new part, then it would make sense that AMD would want to change up a few things about the launch. Because one of the main issues with Zen 5, in addition to it being a minor upgrade for general tasks and gaming, was that all reviews, or at least the majority of reviews, compared the price that those parts were available for, the MSRPs, to long-term lowered pricing for Zen 4 processors.
Mm-hmm.
So when you combine the small performance uplift with this, what appeared to be a large price, a large price increase, even though MSRP versus MSRP was a different discussion that made things a bit different, that led to some very unfavorable coverage. Whereas it's going to be interesting to see coverage of a 9800 XDD in a world where the 7800 XDD is not at its lowest long-term price. If it's not readily available and hasn't been readily available for $330 for the last 6 months, because for the last couple of months, it's been much closer to $400. And as we've talked about now, it's even closer to $600, which is just a ridiculous price. So that's going to be, that's a different strategy. And I think maybe a bit of learning has gone on there. And in addition to that, I think shortening the release cadence between the X3D parts and the non-X3D parts is another thing that they probably needed to do this generation. I think if they waited too long to get those X3D parts out the door, like 6 months, which was sort of what we saw with the previous models, I think with Zen 4, what they announced the X3D parts a couple of months after launch at CES. Obviously, Zen 4 launched in the year a little bit later than we saw from Zen 5, but then the 7800 X3D ended up being about 6 months later, I believe, by the time it actually hit store shelves. So that was probably going to be too long for a Zen 5 generation where, the reception of the parts weren't great. They really need something else to come and excite people. And even if it is just a couple of percent faster than a 7800 X3D, depending on where Arrow Lake lands, that could put that part in contention for the best gaming CPU, which would at least be something to salvage from the Zen 5 generation for gamers, having the Zen 5 part be the fastest gaming CPU, which again, we don't know where that's going to happen due to Arrow Lake or whatever, but there's an opportunity for that to be the case. So
yeah, well, if it's not a deliberate strategy, I don't really know what the explanation could be. And over at Newegg right now, you can buy a 7950 X3D for $570. It is out of stock, to be fair, at that price. The 7900 X3D, though, is in stock at $570. And you have to pay $650 to get yourself a 7800 X3D, which apparently is a sale at the moment, which ends soon.
Sure.
Well, it's not sold by Newegg. It's a third-party sale of that particular deal.
So it's like jack up the price, then lower it slightly, so it's a sale sort of thing.
Yeah. But I mean, if you look at the 7700X, so that's obviously a non-3D Vcache part. It's just the 105 watts Ryzen 7 7700X. You can buy that for $250 right now, US from Newegg, whereas the non-X version's substantially more expensive at $290 US. You do get the cooler with that model, but it's a 65 watt part.
Yeah.
So the 9700X is $330. So you're looking at a $80 premium for that particular Zen 5 part, the 8-core part.
Yep.
And by my calculations, if the 7800 X3D was still on sale at roughly what it was selling for, you'd be paying about an $80 US premium there for the 9800 X3D. So it seems to me, based on all available evidence, that they're trying to avoid that situation being a thing for late next month.
Yeah, and they've run into issues with this in the Radeon department as well, where they've launched parts where, the price to performance ratio compared to existing models in the market has been quite weak. And that's largely been not because the MSRP is much higher than the previous MSRP, but because AMD are so aggressive at updating pricing across all of their lineups for GPUs and CPUs. Intel and NVIDIA have always been a lot more conservative with price changes. They don't respond as much to the market. So if there's a really attractive competing part, they may do a price cut once, well into the life cycle, and leave it at that. But there's not this constantly changing, lowering of prices, sales, moving things back up in price like we're seeing with the X3D models. That doesn't really happen from an Intel or NVIDIA. Whereas, I feel like, parts like the Radeon RX 7600, that was the reception to that part was also affected by the abundance of 6000 series models that was so cheap and available from the previous generation. Whereas if those models had already sold out and you were faced with the reality where the 7600 was the only product, yeah, it probably wouldn't have been amazing, and there would have been those comparisons, but it wouldn't have been like, well, don't get this part at all. You go get that other part. It would have been, well, the old model sort of slowly fell out of stock over time and got cheaper, and now we're in this new situation. So, different periods to evaluate. I think this could work in their favor as well, simply because Arrow Lake isn't predicted to have a very substantial performance improvement over the previous generation parts. So there could be that battle of, if Arrow Lake's a couple of percent faster than existing models, a 9800 XGD is a couple of percent faster than existing Ryzen models. The battle for the best gaming CPU would be unclear in that situation, and you wouldn't want to have Intel potentially gaining the lead by a couple of percent, waiting a couple of months to release the part that everyone knows is coming, which then retakes the lead by a couple of percent. You'd probably just want to get that part out and end that battle as soon as possible.
Yeah, and to be clear, sort of to clarify something you just said, I think you'll agree. We believe that the pricing structure, the pricing strategy for Ryzen is a good thing. It's been successful. Yep. It's helped Ryzen become a success. Probably less so with Zen 4 and Zen 5 that started off a bit too pricey, and we've certainly seen that with Zen 5 relative to Zen 4, but Zen 4, new platform, that sort of stuff. Whereas the Radeon GPUs, they've sort of done the same thing. They've been aggressive on pricing, but it hasn't been as effective because they've started from a dumb position. Whereas
that's right. Yeah.
With the Ryzen 5000 series, the 3000 series, the 2000 series, the 1000 series, we saw them start from a very reasonable, compelling position, and then as the product aged, they continue to reduce the price, because obviously the further you go into the product cycle, you lose some value there, right? Because you haven't been able to enjoy it for the same period of time. Whereas, we've talked about it to death, the mismanagement of Radeon and the terrible prices that they've started at. But if a 7900 XT started at $700 instead of $900, it would have been an amazing product that people would have been flocking to, would have been a success. And then if they had knocked $50 off mid-cycle or something, they wouldn't have even needed to do like a super or a TI super type refresh. They would keep selling well because they would be competitive. But even $800, I think $800, I can't remember what I said in my review now because it was a long time ago, but $800 would have been like the highest reasonable starting point, and they could have dropped it to $700 later. But anyway, that's that. I don't want to go back down that one because we've talked about that to death, but it's just that Ryzen, Radeon, both aggressive with pricing, but sort of not for different reasons, just different starting points that result in a different scenario.
Yeah, different outcomes for sure in terms of the perception of those products. And I think that they're in AMD's in an interesting position where they're constantly having to, pricing a new generation becomes much more difficult when you're constantly updating the previous generation parts in price all the time. So, there's going to have to be a balancing act between how much discount you should get relative to a part that's been discounted, if you get what I mean. Like, a new generation part, if the previous generation part was discounted a couple of months before launch, then it's kind of not that short-term price cut to get the old stock out the door to make way for the new part. It's not really relevant for the price discussion because so many people have bought it at the older price, like the existing higher price. And so the fair comparison would be that sort of higher price relative to the new product, not the short-term discount. But if you are dropping the price of a product 3 months after launch, like we saw with Zen 4, and then maintain that price for years, then that becomes basically the price of the product that then becomes a comparison. But then it's like, how much can you go below that to make it a fair sort of thing?
Yeah, I honestly think that's, to a degree, somewhat irrelevant. I think we're placing too much emphasis on that just because of how underwhelming Zen 5 was. I think if a new CPU generation comes out, so they go with the strategy they go with. The MSRP is a bit higher. It continually gets discounted for the next 12 months or whatever it may be. And when a new product comes along, naturally, it's going to be more expensive and the value won't be quite as good. You pay an early adopter tax. Months later, prices come down. I think that's perfectly fine. And if you look at Zen 4, Zen 3, Zen 2, and you look at our day one reviews, the gaming benchmarks, they've all offered between a 20 to 30% performance improvement generation on generation. Whereas with Zen 5, we saw a 3% performance improvement. So charging, say, 40% more for 3% more 3% more performance is bad. But if you're charging 40% more for 20% more performance, the early adopters, the people who have been waiting for this, they don't care that much that they're not getting the best bang for their buck. They're getting a really powerful CPU. Like 20% more performance is substantial. So you're willing to pay a premium for that. And then the people that aren't, just wait the 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months, wherever it happens to be based on the strength of sales, that you get to the same sort of cost per frame. So really, I think, yeah, we're concentrating so much on this value aspect just because Zen 5 didn't deliver the performance. But if it delivered the performance, the whole value side of things becomes less weighted.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's kind of unlocking like a new tier of performance, right? Like if that 20% performance uplift wasn't possible with the previous part for whatever reason, and that could be, it could be isolated to one aspect of the processor. If they're competing, if it's much better for productivity, 20% better, then that could be that angle as opposed to gaming. It could be for gaming and not for productivity. But at least if it's unlocking some new tier of performance, then yeah, it makes sense for those early adopters to pay that sort of premium. And we see the same thing with GPUs as well. Like the highest tier GPU that unlocks that new tier of performance is typically ridiculously expensive and poor value relative to the rest of the lineup, but it's the part that enables you to do those things for the first time. And so parts like a 4090, for example, yeah, they're outrageous and not meant for most consumers. But if you did want something that you couldn't get before, you have to pay up for it. And then obviously, the discussions come in where value is concerned throughout the rest of the lineup, and you have to make decisions based on, you can't make it 5% faster for a huge, price increase in the mid-range. That sort of thing doesn't work. But usually, should I say usually? Not really. It's probably the case. In some generations, we have seen situations where there have been discounts for older GPUs. The new generation comes in with a maybe similar pricing but much more performance, and people are generally happy with that sort of thing. Even if it's not 100% the best value product the second that it launches onto the market, usually people are okay with that, like reasonably happy with that scenario. And if you can hit both things at once, if you can unlock new performance tiers, offer the best value in the market, in the current market, then you have the flying off the shelf type products, the real winners where everyone's flocking to get them because they're such good value. We've seen that many times with GPU launches in the past where people haven't been able to get their parts at launch because they've hit all those targets at once. So yeah, I think it's important, as you said, to reiterate that the pricing structure that AMD employs for their CPUs is better for consumers because the parts that you're interested in generally get cheaper within a couple of months, and therefore you, at the end of the day, get a better deal than having to wait years for a new part to adjust the price to performance structure or wait for sales that only happen every once in a while. By dropping the parts price over time, it benefits you. That's just the easiest and best way of going about things. It creates some headaches for AMD in pricing products for sure, but for consumers, it's clearly the best way of going about it so that you're always at the forefront of price to performance. And that's the way I'd want all products to be priced realistically, is that they slowly get cheaper over time. That would be amazing. But it doesn't happen for all product segments, unfortunately. So yeah, just to wrap that one up, 9800XG, we haven't heard any confirmed information about when this part will be coming officially, but there's rumors that it will be coming sometime in October. And as Steve's pointed out, there's a few things happening in the market that sort of indicate that room is being made for new parts in one way or another. So we should be seeing that and making it a quite exciting October because Arrow Lake, as we mentioned in the previous podcast, rumors are suggesting that the announcement and release of those products will be in October, sort of announcement towards the start, release towards the end. So lots of CPU stuff coming in October, which should be very exciting for everyone, and hopefully, yeah, just some interesting parts, interesting new things to talk about. So unless you've got anything else to chat about with this, we can take a break and get onto our boring lives. Okay, Steve, people have been waiting since the start of this episode when you said that you've been viciously attacked or whatever. What's happened?
Yeah, so I don't know if I mentioned it on the last podcast, but it was my daughter's birthday at the start of the week, and she had a birthday party the day after.
Yeah.
And we have quite a large property, big gardens and everything, and my daughter wanted to do laser tag. She was turning 10. She loves laser tag.
Nice.
So we looked at and she's been to a few different the time zone laser tag things, and they're not that great. And we sort of suggested we could hire the laser tag stuff because there's like outdoor venues and stuff that are really cool.
Yeah, I've seen those. Yeah,
we've got like a 5-acre garden, so we've kind of got the perfect place to do it in the backyard. So she could just have a party at home, do that. So we looked into that. Long story short, hiring the guns was quite expensive. I ended up buying 2 sets of the Squad Hero, the version 2 of their laser tag stuff, which works really well, by the way. So that all went well. Anyway, the day of the party was starting in the afternoon, so I had all day to prepare because we bought like a heap of cheap tents from Kmart and set them up because she made like a battle royale type map, which is pretty cute. But she did
nice, that's awesome.
I can't remember all of the POIs, but there was like Tent Town, so you can buy like $13 tents up to like $30 tents. Yeah, real cheap. They're
$13.
They're not terrible either. I mean, I wouldn't go camping in one. I'm certainly not recommending them for that use, but they're surprisingly good for the money. Anyway, we bought a couple $100 worth of like assorted tents, and she made this like Tent Town. Then we did a similar type one down the bottom of the property, and I got some Rio, which sounds dangerous, but it wasn't. And I made like some TP type things and covered them in like canvas cloth that we had. And that created some cool structures for cover. So we made about 4 or 5 different zones, not including obviously the gardens because, the bush sort of, you don't need to add anything there. So we made all these cool little POIs around the backyard so they could have this laser tag thing. They played for like 6 hours, loved it. It was a great success. Anyway, halfway through the setup process, I was near one of the gardens. I'm like, a little bit of weeding I could do there while I'm waiting for my wife to bring some more supplies. So I go over, start weeding. I love my weeding. We were talking about how you use chemicals. I was doing it by hand, Tim, trying to look after the environment. No more stuff the environment. I'm nuking it. So I'm weeding away, and then I was like, that sucks. My leg is on fire. And straight away I knew something had bit me, and I'm pretty confident I knew what it was. So thankfully I was wearing leather gloves, and I had a combination of gigantic bull ants and jumping jacks just going. And I was wearing work pants. Hopefully none of them went inside the work pants. They were on the outside. And that's like, that,
wow, yeah.
That heavy duty, like canvas khaki type.
Yeah.
That, proper work pants, like your hard yakka work pants. And mate, that does not stop these little bastards. They just go straight through that stuff. And anyway, my leg's on fire, so I'm squashing them, pushing them off, getting rid of them, jumped out of the garden. I think I got bitten about 6 times by bull ants and jumping jacks. And I was like, that sucks. So I had heaps of work to still do. So it stung and burnt for probably the next half an hour, but I just went about putting up, the TPs and things like that. And it was a nuisance. And then by that night, it was pretty good, it had relaxed, the stinging had stopped, and I had some red marks on my leg, but nothing really nothing too gruesome. It looked fine. Anyway, went to bed that night, woke up the next day. They were welting a little bit and they were a little bit hot, like inflamed, but nothing too terrible. By that night, it was bad. Like some of the jumping jack bites were about the size of a 50-cent coin. So I don't know how to, like a large coin for you,
right,
for people.
Yeah.
Like twice the size of a Coke bottle cap, like off a plastic
like
bottle.
Like the lid, yeah.
Yeah, I'm struggling to think of a good, almost the size of an AM5 CPU. There you go. And it was just white and yellow pussy. And the craziest thing was you could see my pulse. So it was pulsing white and red. Like very visually, I recorded it. It looks nuts. Anyway, my wife Dr. Googled it, and apparently that can happen, and I probably wasn't going to die. So I'm like, that's fine. That's all the reassurance I need.
That's Australian life, isn't it? Get bitten by stuff and you get pulsing sacks.
Yeah, so I had 2 of them that were doing that, quite large ones. I don't know if it was multiple bites in the one location or they were just maybe the jumping jacks. But I couldn't even walk properly. Like I was almost dragging my leg because I couldn't bend my knee. I got bitten on top of my kneecap, the worst one, and then the other ones were just below the knee. So I couldn't really walk properly. And by last night, that's why the Q&A didn't go out last night, by the way, because I got to 8 o'clock and I went to bed. So I ended up having a Polaramine and went to bed, which I don't like to have because those things, I'm so drowsy right now, by the way. I was struggling to keep my eyes open, but I was happy to do the podcast. But yeah, those things make me drowsy, but it did help massively with the inflammation and all that. So it's gone down quite a bit now. Still looks nasty. Like my skin has gone like jelly over the bites. Like it looks bad. But they are improving. They have started to improve. So probably not going to die. I'm hoping they'll be a lot better tomorrow. So yeah, that was fun. Just my luck. Like seriously, everything was going well. I had to kneel because we've got mulch everywhere, so you can't see where the ants are. There's just it all looks the same. And I knelt on the mulch, and then sure enough, when I start getting bit, I look down. They were just swarming out of the mulch everywhere. I'm like, God damn it! So, so I got lit up by bloody ants. But yeah, I may have invested a substantial amount of money in ant granulates that take care of them. I may or may not have done that. So yeah.
Right. And you're like, oh no, you can't put any chemicals on the garden.
Well, I don't. These aren't chemicals. They're harmless to all other animals and whatever. So it says on the product page. But I may have invested in that, and I may be taking my revenge shortly.
Right, but no flamethrowers. You're not going to go that extreme.
Well, if there were no plants there, maybe. But I do care about the garden and the other things in the garden, but not the bloody jumping jacks, those things. I've never been bitten by one. I've been bitten by bull ants before, and they leave a pretty nasty welt, but it's not, there's no real toxins or whatever, so it sort of just hurts. But these things burn like someone's lighting your skin on fire, and the after effects, while not as intense, still bad. Very uncomfortable. Yeah, is probably the best way I can put it. So yeah, that's I did take some videos and photos, which I'll definitely show you next time you come here. But it's pretty gruesome. Does not look good.
Yeah, I don't know. Do I want to see those? I don't know. Is it workplace abuse to show me your
I don't mind.
pussy leg?
I don't mind. You're going to see it. I was almost going to chuck one in BTS. I'm like, nah, it's actually too gruesome. Like, even if I censor it, that could upset people. Yeah, it does look
people
bad.
Will be like, delete that. So
yeah, it's certainly one of the worst injuries I've had in terms of how it looks. It's really weird though. The day they bit me, and what's that channel that does that stuff? In what is it called? The guy that comes across bees and things, and
I've got no idea what you're talking about. Sounds like the sort of thing you'd watch.
I'm just I can't remember what it's called. It's like, I don't know. People listening will definitely know. He's quite popular. There's a guy that goes around and he finds like the worst, most toxic, venomous type critters on the planet. I can't believe you don't know about this guy. He was popping off about a year ago, and he deliberately lets it bite him or sting him, and then you get to see like the reaction of like how much it hurts, I guess, or at least his reaction to it. Balin loves it, by the way. He's a bit of a psycho. But I was thinking about that, and I was like, man, while the initial pain is definitely the most painful, it's the days of extreme discomfort, and also it's a bitter pain. It's not so much the pain as it is just the discomfort and the inability to use my leg properly. So I suppose put that under the heading of inconvenience. But I'd basically, I would take 2 hours of the intense pain to then be fine. Not to have like half an hour to an hour of, it's probably only really intense for 15 minutes, but it was quite painful for about an hour, let's say. But then you have 3 days of it just being absolutely garbage. I'd rather just get it over and done with if I had a choice. But anyway. So that's really all. That's all I got for you.
Well, it sounds like your week has been just a bundle of joy. Just fantastic for you over there. So.
Yeah.
Fun times. Well, luckily for this podcast, you have saved it for once because I haven't been doing anything.
Good timing.
Nothing much has been happening around my way at the moment. So, probably in a couple of weeks, I'll talk more about some of the games that I've been playing, things like Star Wars Outlaws, which I'm still finding reasonably fun. Haven't given up on it yet. Better than the Avatar game. I do highly rate Astrobot on PS5. Great game. Still been playing it with my partner Miranda. We're almost to the end. Fantastic platformer game. Great for kids, I would imagine, as well, for all ages. Yeah, really well made game. Don't think it'll ever come to PC, but if you've got a PS5, great game. And yeah, what else has been happening? We've got the AFL Grand Final this weekend, so very excited to watch that match. Sydney versus Brisbane should be a great game. So looking forward to the rematch of the two most recent losers of grand finals. So Sydney came second in 2022. Brisbane came second last year. So they're facing off for, I don't know, it'd be very upset for whoever loses, because they will have lost two grand finals in the last couple of years. The winner can get some glory. So that should be a good match. And yeah, there's not really too much else to talk about, really, because like I said, I haven't been doing anything. And the weather, we've had probably about one nice day this entire month, so I haven't been doing anything outside or anything like that, really. Probably about time to mow my lawns, so getting a bit long. Yeah, that about does it, really.
Maybe next week you can get bitten by some sort of Australian wildlife and then report your findings.
I mean, I'd rather not. Like, if the option is get bitten by something or have nothing to talk about, I think I'll take the nothing to talk about, especially after your experience.
Well, I guess I just care about the podcast more.
Yeah. I mean, I could become like that YouTuber that you were talking about, the guy that gets bitten by everything.
I got to try and find out. I really should find out what it's called, because let's see.
You're not a mega fan, are you? Because you don't even know what the channel is.
I haven't watched it for a long time. Oh, Brave Wilderness. I knew it was Wilderness something. There we go.
Right.
Yeah. Go check out Brave Wilderness. Sorry if any audio just played then when I clicked on it. Yeah, he gets stung by like deadly scorpions and all kinds of things.
Right.
And they're still uploading regularly. They've got like 21 million subscribers, so just a little small channel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably why I've never heard of them.
Yeah, the guy loves getting stung by just.
Is he based in Australia or is he in the US? Because we don't have scorpions here, do we?
US based, but I believe he likes to travel to get stung and bitten by.
Because we've got all the deadly snakes and stuff, like the inland taipan and all that's around this way, isn't there?
Yeah, I think a lot of our stuff, it's not super optional to get stung by. He does have stung by a bull ant, which I've done a few times, and that's not as bad as the jumping jack. I don't think he has a jumping jack one. They might be called something else. But yeah, I mean, he's been bitten by a lot of things. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, not my cup of tea. If I saw, the old brown snakes and tiger snakes and those sort of things, I'm like, nah, I'll pass on getting bitten by that today, thanks. That's usually my approach.
Yeah, look, it's not worth it even for 22 million subscribers. But, I mean, good on him.
You can probably afford a lot of anti-venom. So.
I mean, the guy has been bitten by a lot of things. I'm not even sure. I don't even know if the venom knows what it's doing anymore, honestly.
Yeah, I've seen this before.
He's been stung by 500 fire ants. Well, that just sounds like hell on earth. But anyway, if you want to see some... I mean, I personally don't like watching that sort of stuff. Balin loves it, so I'm not sure that tells you about Balin.
Well, it's great that the great advertisement for the YouTube platform is in there. There really is a channel that does anything and everything you will find on YouTube, which is fantastic. So
yeah, well, those who are listening, let us know who enjoys Brave Wilderness, because you'd be a lot of people do. It's good content. It's just, again, I don't really like watching people in agony.
Yeah, fair enough. I think that's pretty normal.
I don't know, is it? Apparently it's not.
Well, 21 million people say otherwise.
each video, like Extreme Cactus Attack from 7 years ago has 78 million views.
Oh, yeah. I think that's like half of our entire history of our channel views. I think we're on like 200 to 250 million is like Hardware Unboxed, the all-time views on the channel. So, yeah, one video. Oh, we've got just over 300 million on Hardware Unboxed.
Well, he's got plenty of videos over 50 million, like a couple of pages of them. So,
all right. People enjoy that stuff. Great.
Yep. Learn something new every day, Tim.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it feels like a lot of the time that you say, oh, surely you've heard of this YouTube channel. My answer is always, I've never heard of them. So I guess I'm just very offline despite having an online job and I'm on YouTube all the time.
Well, to be fair, there's a lot of YouTube channels that are massive that most people haven't heard of.
Yeah.
So
anyway, that's probably going to do it for the Hardware Unboxed podcast for episode 46. So thanks for listening or watching this podcast to the end. As always, we've got the 2 ways to access this podcast, the audio version, which is very similar to the video version. The video version has got our face if you really want to see that for some reason, and it's available on YouTube. Otherwise, the audio version just available through all your usual podcast listening places. So yeah, we'll be back next week to chat more about PC hardware stuff. But until then, thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.